This is Story Recapped. Today I'm going to explain an action sci-fi mystery film called Watchmen. Spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. In 1985, in an alternate world, a man watches the news while wearing a smiley pin on his robe. The report discusses a possible nuclear war with Russia, with America's president, Richard Nixon, assuring the citizens' safety. They also reveal a doomsday clock permanently set at 5 minutes to midnight, tracking the United States' tension with the Soviet Union. The man then changes the channel until a tall, slim figure enters. They start fighting, but after exchanging strikes, the assailant hurls the man in the bathrobe out the window of his high-rise. As he dies, a smiley face button pin falls next to his body. Back in 1940, costume superheroes were a part of everyday life. America's masked vigilantes fight crime, forming the Minuteman team to finish what the law couldn't. The original lineup helped capture criminals and won World War II, but most of them died in action, were arrested for breaking the law, or were murdered. After 20 years, a new generation of heroes called the Watchmen emerges. The team includes Dr. John Osterman, also known as Dr. Manhattan, Adrian Osmodeus, Veidt, the new Night Owl, Daniel Dreiberg, as well as the new Silk Spectre named Laurie Jupiter. The team also includes Rorschach, and lastly, the Comedian. By the 1980s, public opinion shifted against masked vigilantes, stating that they are risky alternatives to police. The Keene Act is then passed, declaring all costumed heroes and vigilantism illegal. While most heroes retire, Dr. Manhattan and the Comedian become government agents, while Rorschach operates against injustice outside the law. It is October 12, 1985, when Rorschach makes his first entry into his journal as he investigates the man who fell to his death. He recognized the victim as Edward Blake, also known as the Comedian. While Rorschach searches the apartment, he discovers the Comedian's uniform, weapons, and memorabilia as a former member of the Minutemen and the Watchmen. Rorschach is eager to know the cause of his colleague's death. When police officers arrive at the crime scene, Rorschach is forced to fight them to escape. Meanwhile, Daniel Dreiberg visits the original Night Owl, Hollis Mason. They meet regularly to catch up on old times. According to Hollis, the Minutemen were a masked counterattack to the gangs. They talked about the Comedian's death and how Nixon's current policies forbid masked vigilantes, but Rorschach is unstoppable. As Daniel walks through the door, he sees a news report about Rorschach and the cops on television. When he gets home, Daniel discovers Rorschach is in his house, eating beans in his kitchen. Rorschach shows Daniel the smiley face button he found near the Comedian's place, promoting their speculations as they go down to the Night Owl lab. Rorschach suspects that someone is killing the superheroes, but the Watchmen no longer exist, so Daniel believes that there is nothing to worry about. He advises Rorschach to give up while no one knows his true identity. Rorschach refuses to do so, telling Daniel that he can never live an everyday life knowing that people struggle. As Rorschach leaves, he speculates that nuclear war is coming. Despite facing a potential war, he chooses not to compromise his mortality. One morning, the media interviews Adrian Veidt, a wealthy and brilliant businessman. Adrian discusses developing renewable energy sources to end the war, eliminating the fear of not having enough. After the interview, Daniel warns Adrian that the Watchmen may be in danger. Adrian is not concerned. He is more concerned about the potential nuclear war, knowing that even a being like Dr. Manhattan won't be able to stop the destruction if it happens. That evening, Rorschach sneaks into the U.S. Army Rockefeller Military Research Center to warn Dr. Manhattan and Laurie. Rorschach wants Dr. Manhattan to see into the future to uncover who killed the Comedian, but Manhattan claims he can't see into the future right now due to temporal interference. This alarms both Rorschach and Laurie, who also didn't know about this. Rorschach theorizes that someone wants to prevent the Watchmen from getting in the way of the war, but Manhattan dismisses him and teleports him outside. Laurie is upset over Manhattan's secrecies. Manhattan confesses with collaborating with Adrian to solve the energy crisis to avert the war. He then shows Laurie a glimpse of her blocked memory, where her mother and stepfather are arguing. Manhattan points out how her mind goes to dark places, therefore, he keeps secrets from her. Manhattan acknowledges how Laurie wants to have dinner with him, but instructs her to go with Daniel instead since he's too busy to go out. Later that evening, Daniel is smitten when Laurie walks into the restaurant. They eat dinner and reminisce about the good old days. Laurie admits that John has been becoming increasingly distant from her in the past few weeks. Daniel then notices government protection watching Laurie as she boards the cab to leave the restaurant. On the day of the Comedian's funeral, Dr. Manhattan teleports Laurie to her mother's house, where she immediately vomits in the toilet. Sally Jupiter, Laurie's mother, drinks margaritas in the afternoon, reminiscing about her good old days as the original Silk Spectre with the Minutemen. She remembers when the original Minutemen were taking a group photo in the Wood Panel Club. After the photo shoot, Sally went to the billiards room to change her costume. The Comedian walked in, making suggestive advances towards her. Sally tried to push him away, but the Comedian punched her brutally and was about to force her when another team member, Hooded Justice, intervened and severely beat Blake. After recounting the events, Sally mentions a cryptic remark about Eddie Blake's morality. In the cemetery, the comedian's former colleagues recall their memories with him as the military officers prepared to bury him. Manhattan remembers that during the Vietnam War, he and the comedian fought the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army, allowing the U.S. to win. As the war ended, a Vietnamese woman approached the comedian in a bar, claiming that he was the baby's father. When the drunken comedian refused to accept responsibility for his actions, the woman slashed his face with a broken bottle, leaving a permanent scar. The comedian shot and killed the woman despite Manhattan's pleas for him to stop. Blake then chastised Manhattan for failing him, claiming that his act demonstrated Manhattan's lack of concern for humanity. Adrian also witnesses the burial and recalls a Watchmen meeting. He recalls the comedian as a sarcastic misanthropic pessimist, whereas Osmodeus desired to help humanity. The comedian believed that their sad attempt of heroism would not matter when the nukes start flying. On the other hand, Daniel recalls when he and the comedian attempted to call a rioting group of protesters during a police strike. The comedian gleefully fought the protesters, firing at them, while the Night Owl was disturbed by the state of lawlessness in the country. Amid the mob's devastation, the comedian claimed that this was the American dream. Afterward, a tall man pays his respect to the comedian and returns to his apartment near an adult movie store. He is Moloch, a former Minuteman enemy. Rorschach attacks him in his home, demanding to know why Moloch went to the funeral. Moloch recounts how Eddie Blake broke into his house about a week before, drunk, crying, and rambling on about a list that includes Moloch and a woman named Janie. Still, Blake didn't kill him, telling him that he was more of a friend than his former colleagues. At the same time, Laurie and John are having a private erotic moment when Laurie notices John has replicated himself, ruining the mood. Soon she realizes that John is actually working on the energy design simultaneously, angering her. John assures her that he is still focused on her as she is the only human linking him to Earth. However, Laurie tells him that she no longer wants that responsibility and departs as John teleports the machine to Adrian's lab. Laurie then arrives at Daniel's house, claiming she has nowhere else to go. He already has plans to meet with Hollis for their weekly session and invites her to come along. While on their way to Hollis's, street thugs confront Daniel and Laurie. The former vigilantes easily fend off the thugs. On the other hand, John telekinetically puts on a suit and tie and transports himself to a TV studio for an interview. At the studio, the reporters accuse Manhattan of infecting many of his former colleagues with cancer. Janie Slatter, his ex-girlfriend, reveals that she is afflicted and publicly condemns John. Overwhelmed, John screams and teleports everyone out of the studio. After their street brawl, Daniel and Laurie reach Hollis's house, where they watch the end of Manhattan's interview on TV. Meanwhile, Dr. Manhattan teleports to Mars where he recalls many jumbled events in his life, including where he met Janie in his human form. During his time with her, John was accidentally trapped in an atomic chamber by a time clock, transforming him from John Osterman, a human scientist, into Dr. Manhattan. Manhattan was gradually resurrected, first as a nervous system, then as a skeleton, and finally as a blue humanoid. President Nixon then enlisted his assistance in ending the Vietnam War, which he accomplished. He remembered how he fell in love with a young Laurie and thus breaking Janie's heart. After contemplating, Dr. Manhattan realizes that he's tired of humans and constructs a large watch-like device on Mars. Back on Earth, the government officials confront Laurie for not doing her job of physically and emotionally appeasing Dr. Manhattan, thus allowing him to leave Earth. Laurie recalls meeting the comedian while she was dressed as the Silk Spectre. The comedian talked to her outside, telling her that she reminded him of her mother. However, Sally stepped in and warned him to keep his distance from her daughter. Later that day, President Nixon and the War Cabinet discussed recent events with the Soviet Union and planned for war. Nixon is willing to lose the East Coast in a nuclear war with the Soviets, and he orders to fuel America's bomber planes. He gives Dr. Manhattan 2 days to solve the problems, hoping that he'll be on their side. On the other hand, Lakota and other business leaders have a continuous meeting with Adrian regarding Dr. Manhattan's disappearance. Adrian assures them of his brilliance and desire to unify the world. He threatens to buy them out multiple times before advising them to leave. Threatened, Lakota begins to apologize when a delivery man arrives and begins shooting. Adrian avoids the bullets, one of which hits Lakota between the eyes. Adrian subdues the shooter, but the assailant swallows a poison pill and dies before he can even confess. At a diner, Laurie and Daniel discuss the attack over lunch. Daniel believes that they are in danger and suggests Laurie move in with him for her safety. She hesitates, but agrees. Among the crowd stands Rorschach without a mask, assuming an affair between the two while watching them walk away. Rorschach later learns that the man who attempted to assassinate Adrian worked for Pyramid International, reminding him of a pyramid letter he saw in Moloch's apartment. But when he returns to Moloch's apartment, he finds Moloch dead. He deduces it was recent since his cigarette is still burning. The police have surrounded the building and know Rorschach is inside. Someone has set him up for Moloch's murder. So, he finds a weapon and fights his way out of the building. Despite this, Rorschach is arrested, revealing his identity worldwide as Walter Kovacs. Walter is sent to prison for the murder of Moloch. Dr. Malcolm Long, The state psychiatrist conducts a psychological evaluation on Walter where Walter recalls traumatic events from his life as he examines ink blots. He witnessed his mother kissing a man at a young age who slapped him, saying that she should have aborted him. A young Walter also seriously injured much bigger kids who were taunting him. He complains about how evil society is and a discovery of a heinous murder of a 6-year-old girl. Walter found an axe at the crime scene and brutally chopped the culprit's head in two in multiple blows. The old Walter died with the suspect that night. Dr. Long leaves him, telling the police officer that he can't help them with Walter. In prison, an inmate taunts Walter on the food service line, and he responds by splashing him with boiling grease from a deep fryer, severely burning him. Walter warns the rest of the inmates that he's not locked up with them, but instead, they're locked up with him. Meanwhile, Laurie snoops around Daniel's basement and discovers the Night Owl's lab and flying machine. She presses a random button, triggering the ship's flamethrower and igniting a fire in the lab. Daniel arrives and extinguishes the fire, informing her that the ship's name is Archie, after Merlin's pet owl, Archimedes. He claims he inherited a large sum of money from his father, which helped him pursue Hollis's footsteps, his idol when he was young. Daniel then puts on the night vision owl goggles on Laurie, who wonders if this is how John sees the world. Daniel looks upset over this and walks upstairs. Laurie follows him and says that John sees many things, but he doesn't see her. She then initiates a kiss, but Daniel believes the two are going too fast to make love, to which Laurie agrees and claims that they have all the time in the world. At the same time, Big Figure, a dwarf that Rorschach arrested 15 years ago, mocks him and is now out for vengeance. Big Figure tells Walter that he'll soon be torn to pieces by all the inmates who seek revenge against him. Daniel has an odd dream where he and Laurie are naked in a field. Laurie pulls off her skin, revealing her superhero disguise inside. Soon, a nuclear explosion vaporizes them, ending the dream. Later that night, Laurie finds Daniel staring at his night owl gear, so they decide to dress up, take Archie out, and do something silly. They fly around the city while scanning police reports. When they hear about a burning building, they rush to help the people trapped inside on the upper floor. Night Owl throws Silk Spectre into the burning building and then lines up Archie as she throws all the people into the ship, saving them from an explosion. After taking the passengers to safety, Daniel puts the flyer on autopilot as he and Laurie have a steamy night in the aircraft. Simultaneously, a prison riot breaks. Behind bars, one of the dwarf's giant henchmen tries to grab Walter, where Walter holds the man's hands and binds them to the bars. Another henchman arrives with a grinder and proceeds to cut off the other man's arms before whacking Rorschach's cell bars. As Laurie and Daniel feel satisfied, they decide to free Rorschach from prison. On the other hand, Rorschach quickly subdues the grinder man against the cell toilet, and Big Figure flees for his life. Silk Spectre and Night Owl arrive at the prison, where a prisoner revolt happens. At the same time, Rorschach rushes to the psychiatrist's office to obtain his mask. Silk Spectre and Night Owl subdue dozens of prisoners to find Rorschach. The dwarf runs into the men's bathroom to hide, so Rorschach excuses himself to go to the toilet and murders Big Figure, causing a blood pool to flow on the floor. They then board Archie to leave. When they arrive at Night Owl's basement, Laurie seems bothered, but Daniel tries to comfort her. Suddenly, Dr. Manhattan appears and takes Laurie with him to Mars. At the same time, Hollis calls Sally about learning how Night Owl and Silk Spectre rescued people from a burning building. They take pleasure in the happiness of their successors. When Hollis hangs up the phone, young thugs break into Hollis's apartment, knowing he was the original Night Owl. He fights fearlessly, reliving his glory days, but is still beaten to death. In the basement, Rorschach and Knight agree to go out in costume to search for the person who attempted to murder Adrian. They confront a Pyramid employee at a bar and discover that Janie Slater, who works for Pyramid, hired the man to assassinate Adrian Veidt. As they walk out the bar, they learn from the news that a gang killed Hollis in his apartment, promoting Night Owl to brutally beat up a gang member despite having no idea who killed Hollis. At Mars, Laurie apologizes for sleeping with Daniel, and Manhattan appears unconcerned but still surprised. Laurie then asks him to save Earth from the nuclear war, but Manhattan wonders why he would save it if he doesn't have any stake in it anymore. When she left him, he left the Earth. With Dr. Manhattan unreachable, President Nixon directs DEFCON 1 to send the bombers. Meanwhile, Rorschach and Nightwell break into Adrian's office to inform him about what they discovered at the bar. Desperate to locate Adrian, Night Owl deduces Adrian's computer password to see his itinerary, where they discover that Adrian's company, Veidt International, owns the Pyramid. At the same time, Adrian presides over a celebration for a group of scientists, as they just successfully finished Manhattan's energy reactor. Unbeknownst to them, what they are drinking is poisoned. As he steps over the corrupted bodies of the scientists, Adrian, dressed as Asmodeus, compares them to the Egyptian servants buried with their pharaoh. Asmodeus has them disintegrated like John Osterman's accident a split second later. Back in New York, as Rorschach keeps his journal updated, he drops it through a mail slot of the New Frontier newspaper, just in case something terrible happens to him after confronting Adrian. On Mars, Laurie is disappointed that Manhattan refuses to save the Earth and even dares him to show her what he thinks she's afraid to recall. Manhattan then reveals that her mother eventually had a romantic relationship with the comedian, despite his previous attempted abuse of her. This implies that Blake is her biological father, angering Laurie, thinking her life is just one big sick joke. She destroys Manhattan's machine, promoting him to create a protective shield around them to save them from the debris. Manhattan then tells her that he was wrong to underestimate the value of miracles, calling Laurie's emergence as a miracle despite unfathomable odds. Manhattan agrees to go back to Earth. Rorschach and Night Owl fly to Antarctica, where Archie freezes from the cold weather and crashes. Asmodeus watches Rorschach and Night Owl hiking through the snow towards Karnak on one of the dozens of televisions arrayed around him. Rorschach and Night Owl sneak in, believing that Adrian is unaware of their presence. They confront Asmodeus, but he easily defeats both of them. Asmodeus admits to having the comedian assassinated since he discovered his plans. Adrian spent $2 billion to trick Manhattan into not seeing the future and leaving Earth. He also framed Rorschach to Moloch's death and even staged his own assassination attempt to put himself above suspicion. Asmodeus plans to unite the US and Soviet Union and prevent nuclear war by killing millions in several of the world's most populous cities to save billions. He intends to destroy the towns using devices with Dr. Manhattan's distinct energy signature. Rorschach and Night Owl try to stop him, but Asmodeus has already begun the devastation 35 minutes earlier. Adrian shows the chaos on the TV monitors. The military recognizes that the energy signatures are not from Soviet nuclear devices, but are of Dr. Manhattan, placing suspicions on him. Finally, Laurie and Manhattan arrive at the devastated site of New York City. Manhattan understands that Asmodeus is behind all of this and not the Soviets. They teleport into Antarctica and confront him, but Asmodeus runs into the lab, disintegrating Manhattan. Laurie shoots Asmodeus, but he catches the bullet in his hand. A giant Dr. Manhattan appears overhead, revealing that the one he disintegrated earlier was a duplicate. Despite this, Asmodeus still has the upper hand. He switches the television on, presenting President Nixon blaming Manhattan for the destruction. The president declares that the United States and the Soviet Union have aligned against the common enemy. Dr. Manhattan realizes that Asmodeus' plan is logical, and that revealing the conspiracy would only disrupt the peace and lead to nuclear annihilation. Still, Rorschach can't remain silent and angrily turns to leave, convinced that they have committed a crime to achieve peace and that the world must be aware of it. As Manhattan completely lost his human empathy, he understands Adrian's view in killing millions of innocent people to save the planet without condoning or condemning it. Outside in despair, Rorschach removes his mask and makes one last attempt to talk Manhattan out of Adrian's plan. When Manhattan refuses, claiming that he can change anything except human nature, Rorschach demands Manhattan to murder him. Manhattan eventually kills him, leaving only a bloody outline in the snow. Daniel, a witness, cries out in agony. Later on, Manhattan kisses Laurie goodbye before departing for another galaxy. On the other hand, Daniel returns to the building after witnessing Rorschach's death. He attacks Adrian, telling him that he has deformed humanity, but Adrian remains cold and emotionless as he takes the blows. Feeling hopeless, Daniel and Laurie leave. A few days later, Laurie tells her mother that she knows that the comedian is her father. Laurie doesn't let Sally explain, understanding that people do strange things and it's okay to not say anything about it. Instead, Sally claims that she isn't angry at the comedian because he gave her Laurie. The two comfort each other until Daniel walks in. Daniel asks Laurie on a date, to which Laurie kisses Daniel in response. Life goes on outside. Because of the world's peace, a newspaper editor in New York complains that there's nothing worthwhile to print. The reporter informs Seymour, his apprentice, that he can print whatever he wants from the junk mail collection, not knowing that a vast revelation awaits them in Rorschach's journal. Asmodeus planned all the tragedies that led to this conclusion. Using controlled annihilation and framing Dr. Manhattan, he was indeed successful in uniting the world. In the end, humanity loses its most brilliant and powerful defender to another galaxy, while the villain who defaced humanity remains a cherished beacon of hope. However, the threat of Rorschach's journal suggests that peace would always be only temporary.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.